They thought they were just trimming a few branches. I ended up trimming $40,000 off their bottom line. And the wild part is, I never raised my voice. So let me back up a little. I live in a quiet neighborhood just outside of Cedar Hollow, the kind of place where people wave when they drive by and argue about trash cans being left out too long like it's a federal offense. I bought my house almost 12 years ago. It's nothing flashy, just a ranch-style place with a deep backyard and 6 massive oak trees running along the back property line. Those trees were here long before I was. Thick trunks, heavy canopies, the kind of shade that drops the temperature 10 degrees in July. In the summer, half my yard stays cool and dim, like nature built me a porch roof for free. Those trees mattered to me more than I probably realized at the time. I work from home. I spend a lot of time looking out that back window. Morning coffee, laptop open, dog at my feet, wind moving through those leaves. They weren't just landscaping. They were part of the rhythm of my days. In early March, the house behind mine sold. The previous owner was an older guy named Martin who mostly kept to himself. We'd exchange small talk over the fence, complain about property taxes, that sort of thing. When he moved out, I figured whoever came in next would be the same. Quiet, polite, invisible. Instead, in came a couple in their late 30s, maybe early 40s. Let's call them Evan and Claire. 2 kids, a golden retriever, 2 SUVs, and the kind of energy that feels like it's always about to rearrange furniture. At first, everything was normal. We did the standard neighbor meet and greet. I brought over a 6-pack, welcomed them to the neighborhood. Evan had a firm handshake, steady eye contact, the kind of guy who smiles without showing his teeth. He mentioned he worked in residential redevelopment. Bought homes, renovated them, resold them. He said it casually, but I clocked it. This wasn't a forever home for them. This was inventory. Claire asked about the schools. The kids ran around my yard chasing my dog. We stood near the fence line while the sun filtered through those oak leaves, and I remember thinking, this'll be fine. By mid-April, I noticed something felt off. One morning, I stepped outside with my coffee and saw sunlight hitting a part of my yard that had never seen direct sun before. It took me a second to register what I was looking at. The canopy along the fence looked thinner, uneven. I walked closer. Several branches were gone. Not broken, not storm damage. Clean cuts. Fresh, pale wood exposed where dark bark used to be. Whoever cut them knew how to use a saw. And they hadn't just trimmed the overhang on their side. Some of those cuts were a good 2 or 3 feet into my property. I walked the entire fence line, counted at least a dozen missing branches. A couple were thick enough that you don't remove them with garden clippers. You use a chainsaw. I stood there longer than I'd like to admit, just staring up at the gaps in the canopy. It's strange how quickly something like that can feel personal. I didn't storm over. I didn't start yelling. I went inside, put my coffee down, and walked around front. Evan answered the door. "Hey, man," I said, keeping my tone level. "Quick question. Did you have someone trim the oak branches along the back fence?" He didn't hesitate. "Yeah, they were hanging over our yard. Blocking light. Figured I'd take care of it." I nodded slowly. I get trimming what crosses the line. But some of those cuts are on my side. He leaned against the door frame like we were discussing lawn fertilizer. "It's the same tree," he said. "What's the difference?" "The difference," I said, "is that you stepped onto my property and cut into my trees without asking." He gave this small shrug, like I was overreacting to spilled milk. "They'll grow back. They're trees." I remember that part clearly. The dismissiveness. Not aggressive. Not angry. Just minimizing. I told him I wasn't okay with it and that in the future, if something crossed the property line, we'd talk first. He nodded, but it wasn't agreement. It was a placeholder nod. Conversation over. Door closed. I stood on his porch for a second longer than necessary, feeling that slow burn settle in my chest. That afternoon, I called a certified arborist. Not because I was looking to start something, but because I genuinely didn't know if the cuts mattered. He came out 2 days later. Older guy named Russell, sun-weathered skin, clipboard tucked under one arm. He walked the fence line the same way I had, except he kept shaking his head. "These weren't done properly," he said. "Cuts are too close to the trunk. No regard for collar preservation. That opens the tree up to disease." I asked him straight, "Are they going to die?" He took a breath. "Hard to say. Oaks are resilient, but topping or improper cuts can stress them out. You're looking at possible decay, maybe structural weakness later on. If one goes, removal alone could be 5, 6 grand." He estimated potential damage and preventative treatment at around $3,000, depending on how things progressed. That number changed something in me. Up until then, it was about respect, about boundaries. Now it was about real financial impact. I drafted a letter. Calm, factual. Included Russell's report, photos, and a request that Evan cover the treatment costs and refrain from any further trimming without written agreement. I mailed it certified. No response. 2 weeks passed. Then one morning, at 7:12 a.m., I woke up to the sound of a chainsaw. Not distant, not vague, right outside my bedroom window. And that's when the situation stopped being about trees. That chainsaw sound, it does something to your nervous system. It's not subtle. It's invasive. It rattles through the walls and settles right in your chest. I was out of bed before I fully woke up. Pulled on jeans, didn't even bother with a shirt, just stepped into boots and headed straight for the backyard. Evan was there. Not a hired crew this time. Him, standing in my yard, on a ladder, cutting straight through the main leader of one of the largest oaks. For a second I just froze, because my brain couldn't process the audacity. He wasn't trimming overhang anymore. He was topping the tree, taking the crown off like it was a hedge. "Hey," I yelled. He looked down, killed the saw, calm as ever. "Morning. Get off my property." He glanced around like he needed confirmation. "The trunk straddles the line," he said. "Figured I'd even it out." "Even it out? You're butchering it." He sighed, like I was being dramatic. "It was blocking our upstairs light. Claire wants more sun in the kids' rooms." "It's not personal." That line stuck with me. "It's not personal." "You're standing in my yard with a chainsaw," I said. "It's personal." We stared at each other for a long second. Then he climbed down. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just carried the saw back across the fence like he'd borrowed a rake. I walked over to the tree. The top was gone. Just flat. Exposed. Ruined silhouette against the sky. I called Russell again. He came out that afternoon and didn't even try to hide his frustration. "Topping is one of the worst things you can do to an oak," he said. "It shocks the system. You'll get weak regrowth, water sprouts, possible decay. That tree might not recover." Might not recover. I asked him to document everything. He did. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the noise. Because of the pattern. This wasn't ignorance. It wasn't misunderstanding. It was deliberate. He knew I'd objected. He knew I'd sent documentation. And he did it anyway. Around 2 a.m., I did what most people do when they feel powerless. I started researching. Evan had mentioned he worked in redevelopment. I found his professional profile easily. Managing partner at a small firm that specialized in value-add residential transformations. I almost laughed at that phrase. Digging a little deeper, I realized something important. They hadn't moved in emotionally. They'd moved in strategically. The house behind mine wasn't a forever home. It was a project. Buy low, renovate, sell high within 12 months. The backyard, the light exposure, the aesthetic from upstairs windows, those weren't lifestyle choices. They were resale considerations. That shifted my thinking entirely. If this was an investment, then investment math applied. And investments are sensitive to risk. The next morning, instead of marching back over there, I called the city's urban forestry department. Turns out, in Cedar Hollow, any tree over a certain trunk diameter is considered protected canopy, even on private property. Any significant trimming requires a permit. Topping, absolutely prohibited without review. I asked a simple question. What happens if someone cuts without a permit? They sent an inspector. I submitted photos. Russell's written assessment. Property survey showing the trunk base clearly inside my boundary. 3 days later, a city truck pulled up in front of Evan's house. I watched from my kitchen window as the inspector walked the fence line, measured trunk diameter, took photos, knocked on Evan's door. That conversation was longer than mine had been. Later that afternoon, I received a call confirming what I already suspected. No permit had been filed. Multiple violations. Fine assessed. $1,500. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was official, documented. And that's when I started looking beyond the trees. If you've ever bought a house, you know everything leaves a paper trail. Permits, additions, inspections. I pulled the public property records for Evan's place. The listing from when he bought it advertised a newly finished basement and a custom backyard deck, both highlighted as selling points. But when I checked the permit history, nothing. No approved basement finishing. No deck permit. No electrical inspection. No plumbing sign-off. Now, to be fair, That could have been the previous owner's oversight. Maybe Martin cut corners before selling. But here's the thing about flipping houses. Once you buy it, it becomes your problem. And if you plan to resell within a year, unresolved violations become very expensive surprises. I sat at my desk staring at the screen for a long time. There's a line between protecting yourself and escalating out of spite. I knew that. I could feel it. But I also knew something else. If I let this go, it wouldn't stop. Because from Evan's perspective, the math said he could keep pushing. Minimal resistance. Maximum outcome. So I called the city's building department. I didn't accuse. I asked questions. I'm looking at public records, I said. I don't see permits for the finished basement or the deck at 214 Ridgeview. Should those be on file? The woman on the phone paused. Let me check. More typing. No permits recorded for those improvements. What happens if a property is sold with unpermitted work listed as a feature? We need to inspect. I provided the address. 2 weeks later, another city vehicle showed up. This time, it wasn't forestry. It was building compliance. The inspector spent almost 3 hours inside that house. I know because Evan texted me midway through. Did you call the city on us? I stared at the message. I responded carefully. I reported damage to my trees. The rest is public record. He didn't reply. By evening, word spread quickly. Our neighborhood isn't big. Claire was outside pacing on her phone. The kids were inside. The golden retriever barked every time a truck door slammed. 2 days later, I saw the notice taped to their front window. Multiple code violations. Unpermitted electrical in the basement. Improper plumbing tie-ins. Deck footings not up to current structural standards. Basement egress windows too small to meet safety requirements. Which meant, before resale, everything had to be corrected. Not patched. Corrected. Deck torn down and rebuilt to code. Electrical and plumbing opened up and re-inspected. Basement windows enlarged. When you're flipping a house on tight margins, that kind of delay bleeds money. Contractor fees. Permit fees. Holding costs. Mortgage payments ticking every month the house doesn't sell. A week later, Evan knocked on my door. First time he'd crossed the street voluntarily. We need to talk, he said. His tone was different. Not dismissive. Controlled, but strained. We stood on my porch this time. You've made your point, he said. The tree fine, whatever. But reporting the house. That's excessive. I looked at him for a long moment. You came into my yard twice with a chainsaw after I asked you not to. He ran a hand through his hair. It was just light. We needed light. You needed profit, I said quietly. That landed. He didn't deny it. You're going to cost us a lot of money, he said. I thought about Russell's estimate. About the ruined canopy line. About waking up to that chainsaw. You already cost me enough, I replied. He stared at me like he was recalculating the situation in real time. This isn't neighborly. Neither is cutting down someone else's tree. There wasn't much left to say after that. Renovation trucks started showing up within days. The deck came down first. Loud. Messy. The backyard that had needed more light now looked like a construction zone. The irony wasn't lost on me. And I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a certain grim satisfaction every time I heard a hammer. But it wasn't over. Because while the city handled permits and compliance, the damage to my trees was still unresolved. And I wasn't planning to let that slide either. By the time summer rolled around, the house behind mine looked like it had been put through a mild war. The deck was gone, just dirt and concrete footings sticking out like broken teeth. The basement windows were cut open wider, raw framing exposed for weeks before new egress units were installed. Electricians came and went. Plumbers tore into drywall. Inspectors showed up with clipboards like clockwork. Every truck that pulled up cost them money. And through all of it, my oak tree stood there with its crown hacked off, trying to survive. Russell had started treatment to prevent infection, but he'd been honest. The structural integrity would never be the same. It would regrow, sure, but weakly, chaotically. The shape was ruined. If decay set in over the next few years, removal might be unavoidable. That thought sat heavy with me. Because here's the thing people don't talk about when they tell stories like this: retaliation doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel like a movie. It's slow. It's administrative. It's paperwork and patience and watching someone else's stress unfold in real time. And you have to sit with your own motives. Was I protecting my property? Yes. Was there a part of me that wanted him to hurt the way I'd felt standing under that butchered canopy? Also yes. By August, I filed in small claims court. I didn't hire a lawyer. I didn't need to. I had documentation, photos from before and after, Russell's written evaluation, the city's violation record confirming unauthorized trimming, certified mail receipts showing I'd attempted resolution. I requested the maximum allowable amount under our county limit, $10,000. Evan showed up to court in a pressed button-down shirt, legal pad in hand. Claire sat beside him, jaw tight. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When the judge asked me to explain what happened, I kept it simple. No theatrics. Just facts. Your Honor, I own 6 mature oak trees along my rear property line. The defendant entered my property without permission and removed substantial portions of one tree after being notified in writing not to. A certified arborist assessed the damage and determined improper cutting methods that may compromise the health and structural stability of the tree long-term. The judge flipped through the report. Did you obtain a permit? He asked Evan. Evan hesitated. No. Did you enter the plaintiff's property? It was straddling the line. That's not what I asked, the judge said calmly. Another pause. Yes. That was pretty much it. Court isn't dramatic. There's no music swelling in the background. Just fluorescent lights and a clerk typing quietly in the corner. The ruling came 2 weeks later. $7,500 awarded in my favor. Not the full 10, but enough. When the check arrived, I didn't celebrate. I deposited it. Scheduled further preventative care for the trees. Set some aside in case removal ever became necessary. Evan never spoke to me again after that. By November, the construction was finally done. Fresh deck. Updated basement. New listing photos went live online. Fully renovated. Move-in ready. Sun-filled spaces. That last one almost made me laugh. The house sat on the market longer than expected. Interest rates had ticked up that fall. Buyers were cautious. And inspection contingencies now carried extra scrutiny because of the property's recent compliance history. Eventually, it sold. Public records showed the final sale price barely cleared what Evan had originally paid, once you factored in closing costs and holding expenses. When you add the fines, the reconstruction, the legal judgment, the lost time, the margins evaporated. One cold morning in early December, I watched a moving truck pull away for the last time. Evan stood in the driveway with his hands in his coat pockets. For a brief second, our eyes met across the fence line. No wave, no nod, just acknowledgement. And then he was gone. A new family moved in that spring. Young couple, first-time buyers. They came over with cookies the first week. Asked about the trees. I told them everything they needed to know. Now, here's the part people usually expect me to frame as some kind of moral victory. The truth is more complicated. I didn't win in some cinematic way. My tree is still scarred. It will never look the same. Every time I see that uneven regrowth, I'm reminded of how quickly someone can step over a boundary when it benefits them. But I also learned something about myself. I'm not confrontational by nature. I avoid drama. I prefer quiet solutions. Yet when pushed, I realized I'm patient, thorough, willing to play the long game. Evan operated like someone who believed small violations were the cost of doing business. Trim here, cut there, maximize light, maximize value. If someone complains, shrug it off. What he didn't calculate was that some costs compound. Not because of revenge, because of accountability. I've replayed that first conversation in my head more times than I can count. If he'd knocked on my door before touching a single branch, we probably would have worked something out. If he'd apologized after the first incident, maybe I wouldn't have dug deeper. If he'd stopped after the letter, none of the rest would have happened. But he doubled down. And sometimes doubling down is what tips the scale. So here's what I'm curious about, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Did I go too far? Was reporting the unpermitted work crossing a line? Or was it simply holding someone accountable for the risks they chose to take? At what point does protecting your property become retaliation? Because in neighborhoods like mine, where fences are close and lives overlap, those questions matter. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read them. I'm interested in how other people would have handled it. And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor who thought your boundaries were optional, I'd like to hear that too. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it sounds like paperwork being filed quietly and a chainsaw finally going silent.